If you're new here, my name is RuthAnn. My husband Lance was a service-connected, disabled U.S. Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and for the last 12 years of his life, I was his full-time caregiver. This podcast is about caregiving in all its forms. My friend Jenna joins me to share her perspective as a stay-at-home mom who homeschooled her 5 children. At first, our lives seem very different, but we found we actually have a lot in common. So we share what connects us, hoping it helps you find your connections too.
Today's topic is about building community. And this is something that Jenna and I have talked about before. And I recently had my friends Kevin and Allison on for a series that we did on disability and advocacy. And one of the topics was community. And the reason that I want to talk about this again is because I think that it's an important topic that we need to continue to talk about, because most of the people I know who are dealing with disability and chronic illness have the same issues with not having enough community, with being isolated. And it's really hard. Community is so important for everyone. And I don't know that most people realize how isolating the life of a caregiver can be, especially when dealing with a chronic progressive illness. So Jenna and I have decided to talk about it again today. Hi, Jenna.
Hello. Glad that we are together again.
Let's kind of talk about some of the reasons, maybe some of the reasons that it is hard to build community. I know that as Lance became more disabled, it became harder and harder for us to build that community. And we saw a lot of people just fall out of our life because we weren't able to participate in things that we had been before. You know, life changes and you just kind of go with the people that are on the same path that you're on. And that's really hard when you're dealing with disability, because in our case anyway, we didn't have anyone else in our life nearby that was dealing with anything similar. So we became increasingly isolated. And I know I've talked about that a lot.
I think you touched on really what it is just your life path. And that can be the same for anyone going through anything, but I think it is most glaringly obvious in a situation like yours, where it's such a unique situation. Like, it's so unique that the likelihood that you're going to encounter someone that's in a similar situation is pretty low. Um, your life became increasingly more complicated. You had less and less time. You had more required of you, which meant you had little to give. And we talk about community. Community is relationship, and relationship is reciprocal. So it becomes increasingly difficult when you've got people in situations where they have very little to invest into a relationship. It's going to be hard to find a relationship that can be, for lack of a better term, lopsided, because you guys were in a position where you probably needed more from people than you were able to give, because your life was as complicated as it was, and you were as exhausted and as busy, and it was as all consuming as it was for you and for Lance. So when you talk about community, it's having to find something that meets your needs in whatever season you're in. And for you guys, that became more and more and more challenging, to find people who could give more into the relationship than maybe they were going to get out of it.
Right. And that immediately made me think of a couple of instances in the earlier days of Lance's disability, where people tried to include us who were couples and would say, oh, let's go out on a double date. And I'm thinking, and actually I said this, I am my husband's legal guardian. We're not going out on a date. It's really important to meet people where they're at. And for us, we couldn't meet people where they were at because we were living such a challenging life already. And like you said, we were already exhausted. So building community really means that people who are not dealing with so much need to be more intentional about building those relationships with people who are dealing with a lot. And it's not for everybody. We were fortunate to have several people in our life who were willing to walk alongside us through that. Most of them we found through church. There were a few that we found through the gym. But I don't know. I know that it sounds unfair. But I remember early on in Lance's disability, I was so frustrated and so angry with all the changes that were happening to him, and that I was having to continue to give up things about myself in my life because he could no longer do these things. And I had a friend who had a chronic illness, and she had a daughter with a chronic illness. And she said to me, unfortunately, that's the way that it has to be. You're going to always be the one who compromises. You're always going to be the one who makes concessions because he can't do that anymore. And at the time, I thought it was really unfair of her to say that. But as time went on, I realized that that was the truth of it. He couldn't make those changes anymore. He could no longer compromise. I had to meet him where he was at. And that's what it needed to be as we were building our community, as people were falling out of our life. We were in our 30s then. People that we knew our age they had children at home. They weren't able to do the things with us. They didn't have the time to invest in this relationship. And we ended up with a lot of older people in our life. And we had a few people who were willing to just come and spend time with us in the way that we needed. And I'm really grateful for that.
I think that brings up a really significant element of what we're talking about. And that's kind of thinking outside of the box in terms of relationship. And this is something I went through to a lesser degree, but it's the same element when I became a mom at 20 years old and then had 5 kids by the time I was 30. So all of my peers were in a very, very different position than I was. So when I was getting my first minivan, many of my peers were just barely graduating from college. And I had to rethink what my friend group might look like or what my support system might look like. And that became, like you said, it was women and men much older than me. I had many friends that were oftentimes 10, 15 years older than me because that's the season of life I was in. I had, kids in starting middle school when many of my peers were just having their first child. I'm dealing with that right now. I see it all the time. I'm about to be an empty nester at 46 with 5 kids. And I have many friends who still have, or I should say peers, who still have children in elementary school. And unfortunately, it's like I'm not in that season of life anymore. And we can hang out maybe and talk, but we don't have as much in common to talk about. My life's in a different place. And so I think you did a wise thing by opening yourself up to people who maybe understood your situation, who were in a similar season of life, even though chronologically it didn't make sense, right? They're not your peers, but they are your life season peers, right? They're going through the same things or who have been through the same things. And I think that's an important point of community is thinking outside the box, like not saying, what do I have in common with this person over here? That's why would I be friends with them? But rather saying, if you and I have a similar perspective on life, regardless of our age or maybe where we should be, we have something in common. And so I think that's cool that you were able to identify, oh, these are my life season peers and people with whom I might find points of connection.
Right. And I mean, that was really important. But part of the issue that I had was that was when we did things with other people as a couple. When Lance and I did things together with other people, it was that older group. And when I say older, I mean we were in our 30s and we were hanging out with people in their 70s, because that's just where we were at. But when I wanted to spend time with people my age, there was really nobody around because all of these people had fallen out of our life. And so I think the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because when I interviewed Kevin and Allison, it really took me back to that time in my life and the things that I struggled with, and really looking at the people who were in our life, who were closer to our age. And what they did was they met us where we were at. They were intentional about spending that time with us, knowing that they didn't really have anything in common with us, other than our age at the time, but they knew that we needed this. So I would really like to encourage people, when you see somebody dealing with a disability, that community isn't just about that person with a disability. It affects the entire family. And by the time Lance died, I felt like I was 150 years old. I know I've said that before, and I don't really feel like that's an exaggeration. I felt so exhausted and so old, and I had lived this old person's life for so many years, because in our 30s, we're hanging out with people in their 70s. And by the time Lance died, these people are in their 80s. And so I felt like I was already old and retired. I didn't have a lot of people that I could connect to, or that I could connect with after he died, who were closer to my age. And it was just really strange.
I think what you're talking about with people being willing to step outside of their comfort zone and say, this woman needs help. She is exhausted. She's overwhelmed. She's at the end of her frazzled and frayed rope, and she just needs someone to see her and connect with her. And I would take, at that point in my life, a 30-minute coffee break, like them just coming to my house with my, chaotic, whatever environment. Because I think, I don't know that your environment ever felt chaotic to me. It felt overwhelming sometimes when it would come into your home, because it was things that I wasn't used to being around. But I don't think it ever felt chaotic. I do, in hindsight, think my home felt chaotic because it was noisy. It was, there were toys all over, whatever, and there's like all this crap. It's same thing that you have, right? All this like crap that you have for this person that you're taking care of. And I had all this crap sitting around my house for these people that I was taking care of. And I was so glad to get rid of that stuff. But those people that were willing to come into my environment, meet me there, and just sit with me for a few minutes, like, it recharged me so much. So I can imagine what it did for you in an even more isolated sense for even longer.
Well, and I think a part of it is people think that they see how much help we needed. They were seeing how much help we needed, and they didn't want to put themselves in a position where they felt obligated to do things for us. And so I think that that was a lot of the reason why it was hard to build community. And we're going to talk about that in another episode, but I do think that it's really important. That's where boundaries come in. If you're going to be a part of someone's community, reach out to people, but be very upfront with them as far as I can have coffee with you. I can't help you with anything right now. Or I want to be able to go for a walk with you and spend 30 minutes, but that's all that I can give right now. I value you as a human being. You matter to me. But right now, this is all that I can manage. And I think that it's really important to do things like that. And that's what we got from the people who were um, spending time with us and being a regular part of our life. They let me know up front, this is what I can offer. And we took what they offered because it was a lot. You might think that what you're giving to somebody isn't very much, but 30 minutes, that's a lot. That's huge. For me to be able to step outside of my caregiving life for 30 minutes, an hour, something like that, and just be outside of that world for that long, it recharged me and it made me feel like my life had value again, that as somebody besides just a caregiver, because that's what I was 99.9% of the time.
I think it helps you feel normal for a minute. And I mean, if we're honest, like what an illusion normal is, like it's not, doesn't really exist. But when you're in that space to just feel normal for a minute, like it's so valuable. You just feel like you fit in for just a minute.
Well, there might not be normal, but there's definitely abnormal. I mean, anyone looking at our life would think that is abnormal. It's nice to not feel abnormal.
When you said that, I think that's such an important point about what you are willing to do. Because I'm sure people saw me and instantly thought, I'm going to be babysitting and helping this woman clean her house. And honestly, I would never dream of asking someone to babysit my kids. Do you know what I mean? Or to take advantage of that somehow, um, just because someone was there. I was never looking for an outlet to kind of release some of my responsibility or the overwhelming load of tasks that I had to do. Like I was never looking for someone to clean my house. I was never looking for someone to babysit. I just wanted someone to have an adult conversation with because I talked to babies all day. And so because I didn't work, because I was a stay-at-home mom, it never ended. It was 24/7 talking to babies. And so I think that's such an important point to say, what is it you're willing to do and have boundaries? Because there are people who will take advantage of you. Have those boundaries up front so the expectation is clear. And whatever you're willing to give, like you said, you have no idea what an impact that would have on that person.
Right. And I can relate to the just having a normal conversation too, because Lance had dementia. So the last 12 years of his life, as his dementia progressed, those conversations were less and less, to the point that when he died, I was only having conversations in my head. We were just talking about this earlier, where I still do this sometimes. Somebody pointed out, actually, I don't even know that somebody pointed it out to me, but I saw strange looks right after Lance died. And I had to stop and think, did I say that out loud or did I just think that in my head? Because as the last few years of Lance's dementia, he lost interest halfway through a conversation just because his short-term memory was so bad that he couldn't hang on to what I was talking about. And so I would see that he completely lost interest and I would just shut up and I would finish the conversation in my head, whatever I was talking about. And I realized that I was doing that after he died, when I started getting strange looks from people. And I was like, oh, what part did you not hear? So having those normal conversations with people who were not dealing with cognitive decline, and not dealing with medical stuff, that would have been very valuable for me. And I don't think that I would have struggled so much with my communication had I been able to have those regular conversations with people.
I think you don't realize when you're not in that kind of a space, in a space where that communication is being tested. I mean, for you, you're dealing with cognitive decline and someone who just can't carry on a conversation because they can't remember what they were talking about. And, you know, and I think like it's not even a fair comparison, but it's the best thing I have to compare it to is, talking to someone who doesn't speak English or has zero comprehension. And if you have, a supportive partner and someone who's there with you to take up some of that slack, that helps. But if you don't have that, you're kind of stuck in having to find it from outside sources. And those, like I said, those people that were willing to step into my life, that weren't scared, and just say like, hey, I'll have an adult conversation with you. And we didn't have to talk about um, diapers or potty training or nursing or whatever thing. It was just nice. It was nice. And I think people just underestimate the power of just a connection in a conversation, and how much that can revive someone's spirits when they're at their wits' end.
Well, even at the end of Lance's life, just those last 2-3 years, just getting text messages from people, because I really wasn't able to spend time with people anymore. But a random text from somebody letting me know that I was not forgotten, that was huge. That was such a big deal. So it can be something as simple as that, maintaining that sense of community, even though you can't actually spend time in person with other people anymore.
This has been a good conversation and something to think about, because it has really made me think about how I'm doing that for the people that I encounter, and how I can reach into people's lives with boundaries. I think that's so, so important, because I have a tendency to overextend myself, or I should say I'm getting much better as I get older at recognizing that before my mouth opens and I say something that I can't take back. um, I think it's important to know what those boundaries are, what you really realistically can and can't do. Um, but I think I just need to continue to be intentional and invest in people. And maybe that's young moms, and maybe that's, people that are struggling with health issues or things like that, or maybe it's elderly people that are lonely. I think it's just reminding me how important that is and how important it was to me, and that I just got to keep doing it for the rest of my life, because there's always somebody's life that you're supposed to be in, and you shouldn't be in people's lives that you're not supposed to be, but you better get to being in the lives you are supposed to be in.
And I would encourage people to join the conversation. Leave us a comment on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, or if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, send us a text message. We would love to hear from you. Well, thanks so much for joining me for this conversation, Jenna. I'll see you next time.
Bye.